Hey there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We've got baby Bram eating a bottle right now while we record this podcast. Roxy's got a baby in her lap and I've got a comfy blanket in my lap. So, well, it's good to be back for another episode post Pelvicon. We mentioned on our last episode that we would both be having this conference between now and then. So we're excited to kind of dive in. Tonight, we are going to share a few takeaways that we got from Pelvicon, some nuggets. And then we will probably, over the next few weeks or months, pull out different topics that we learned about and chat about those. I know we did that last year and that was really good review for us, honestly, and helpful for a lot of people. So we'll do that. But before we get started, Roxy, we haven't done this in a couple episodes, I think. Tell me something good.
Oh gosh, there's been lots of good going on. We had just this, I think the fall weather is like just the little nut nibbles that we've had has been really joyous for me. But we had a fun get together at my brother's house. He's turning 33 and my nephew was turning 3. So they did the triple threat little birthday party.
That's fun.
But it was just fun. There was just a bunch of family and friends and little campfire. And it just felt like your traditional fall get together. You know, we roasted hot dogs over a fire and had mallows and s'mores and kids were running around. My sister-in-law was like, please do a corn pit. She told my brother, please get corn for a corn pit. So they had a little corn pit for the kids. And it was just
I
so
fun. We need to rewind. What did you say you had at the campfire? Mallows?
Yeah, marshmallows. What'd you think I said?
I've just heard them referred to as marshmallows.
Oh yeah, mallows.
I've never heard that before.
I don't know if that's a thing. That's a thing. I feel like in my life,
folks. I would like to take a poll of who calls marshmallows
mallows.
Oh man. Okay, let me think here.
Yeah, what was your something good?
Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. We've had lots of fun, good stuff going on. I actually had my first acupuncture appointment ever today. So I guess I would call that, something good. And as far as me being okay, it is time I take care of myself. I could do an episode on what's been going on in my life. Would be called.
Hey, I did birth story. We could do Megan
after dark. Yeah. Megan after she turns 40. So yeah, I went and it would maybe be an interesting thing after I have a few episodes to talk about because I refer people to acupuncture. People ask me about it. I'm like, yeah, go for it. In fact, I don't know. Maybe for myself, I just thought, meh. But yeah, I've just been dealing with all sorts of different things and some kind of odd things, but that's what you get with autoimmunity issues. And so I went and I was there for 2 hours. It was supposed to be an hour-long appointment. I know. Fascinating. And the guy it's just fascinating. So we'll talk more about that. But I guess I'll say that's what Tell Me Something Good because I was just proud of myself that it was like, all right, in order for me to take care of others, I have to take care of myself. It's literally what I preach to other people and I don't listen to my own advice. So here we go. Neither here nor there. Moving on. Okay, Pelvicon 2025, folks. It was a good one. We had lots of really amazing speakers. And so we're just going to kind of go through. I just kind of pulled out some things from some different topics that stuck with me. And Roxy is going to also. So Roxy did it virtually because she just had her baby and I was there in person. So we were texting back and forth during some of the lectures to this is over my head or
What we would be whispering to each other
What we would
in
be whispering,
person.
yes, in person. We were doing via text messaging. So, one of the talks that from the beginning that I really enjoyed was one of the talks that Susan Clinton gave us. And the title of it was When the Diaphragm and the Pelvic Floor Disagree, and it's Orthopedic Foundations and Abdominophrenic Dyssynergia. And this I really honed in on because she talks about like these patients that have bloating and distension. And a lot of times people don't know what to do with them. Of course, it's like, yeah, we have our normal pelvic floor things we can look at. And the phrenic nerve and all of that is not anything necessarily, it's not that I've never heard it before, but sometimes there's things that you forget about or you overlook. And so, anyway, one thing that I really thought was fascinating is she says that you can normally trace back to a traumatic event and someone had something happen to then afterwards, they were like, I've had this GI symptoms, this distension, this bloating. And when she said that, I was like, oh my gosh, because I could think of a couple patients where that's kind of the case. They were like, I was fine. And then like this one thing happened. And then here we are. So that was something that I thought was really fascinating. And then the crosstalk with like the visceral and the somatic systems that happen, pointing that out. Again, this just goes right up our alley with how we both treat. And so to hear this talked about on a larger stage and giving us more knowledge as to sometimes it's hard to explain why we know things work. So that was great. And then talking about where the phrenic nerve comes from, C3, 4, and 5, and how that goes and innervates the diaphragm, and how if that is tractioned, how that can impact the diaphragm, which then if the diaphragm's not working correctly, how that's going to impact digestion and on down the cascade of events. So I just thought that was really good. And then the diaphragm stiffness, we see a lot of times with rib flares. Then I had written down like the diaphragm contracting pulls on the dura and the phrenic nerve. So just basically going back to like everything needs to move, which again is why we need to be treating outside of the pelvic floor. Like you cannot be doing just pelvic floor stuff with GI.
Well, and I think that she just did a good job. It was just like you kind of hinted on, like sometimes it makes sense in our head. We know that if we do this, it's going to be beneficial and helpful. But I think when we hear it, I think sometimes we can maybe, and I might be speaking out of turn, I'll just speak for myself, there's that nervous system piece and that biopsychosocial piece of like you talked about the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the mechanical piece. And I would say as an ortho PT, before I really dove into pelvic health, my brain was only mechanical. And then as I've gotten into pelvic health, it's gone into that more of like understanding the nervous system and whatnot. And I feel like she did a good job of really honing in on the mechanical piece, but through the lens of the nervous system. Does that make sense?
I would 100% agree. She did a really good job of putting the two together.
And so I just think a lot of times historically, it's been like, oh, I'm looking at it from nervous system and biopsychosocial. Oh, I'm looking at it from mechanical. And she just blended it really well to say it is both. And this is why. And from a really anatomical lens, brought in the nervous system from the physical nerves and why the diaphragm is so important. And we know that. We've talked about the diaphragm on here before. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to those episodes. But anyway, I just thought that she did the best job of blending it all together in a way that made sense. And really, as practitioners, giving us a little bit maybe better language of an understanding, sure, of why we're doing what we're doing and why it's working and why our patients need that still, and just kind of validating that, I think.
Agree. And then one of the quotes she had, which I feel like I need to like plaster this in my office. Healing begins when we replace fear of dysfunction with curiosity about the person's rhythms, sensation, and wisdom. I thought that was pretty powerful, and I probably will put that up in the office. So anyway, that was my first one. And then another talk that I really did enjoy, and we're just going to breeze over it because I think that this deserves, it's a whole podcast episode. And so Roxy and I kind of want to go back and digest a little bit more and structure this so that it feels a little bit more for the, everyday person. But it was on demystifying persistent genital arousal disorder, which is PGAD for short. And basically, it's not talked about a lot, and there isn't a lot of information out there. And in fact, at the end of it, she talks about the takeaways, and she's like, congratulations. You know more than 90% of the world does about PGAD now. And I thought that was just so fascinating because there really isn't that much, But one thing with this is just we really do need to be mobilizing like the clitoral hood and paying attention to that. She talks about how like men that are uncircumcised are taught about the foreskin and cleaning and hygiene, where it's just not a conversation we're having with women. And so that was one thing that was talked about, which I think is super important. It's not, again, not the first time that we're told this, but it's a good reminder. We'll pull some more information out and share more about that. But anyway, I thought that was good. Anything else from that, Roxy, that stood out?
Yeah, I just think when she was really talking about just the discrepancy between the male and female education that we received, that was super powerful to think about that, because I was like, yeah, I have never heard any normalized instruction, and even just with little Bram and his little circumcision, like they were like giving us all this information, and this is, all this stuff about just even helping that. I mean, that just in and of itself was interesting. But anyways, not about him, but just like, okay, this is how we heal this. And it was really much like, we need to keep this mobile. Like, here's some little things to do so that this foreskin heals, this little skinny area heals and whatnot. And there's so much knowledge about it. It's just a normal conversation, and just like objectively told us what to do. And I thought about like the girls, like no one taught us when they were born, like, this is how you take care of their genitals. Like, this is how you clean. This is how you teach them to clean. Mm-hmm. And I just like, when she was going through that, I think just more than what she was saying was what she was objectively saying about it.
Yeah.
It was just that discrepancy between males and females, and how little females are instructed on just hygiene. And then also thinking about then just the carryover of not just hygiene. It's not like if you're dirty, you're going to have arousal disorders, but it's
right.
It's just the idea there of, man, just even then, I think the topic of arousal in and of itself is not talked about. And there's so many layers to that. And I think you're right in, we need to unpack that in a planned, a little more planned way than just trying to do it justice right now. But just even hearing someone discuss arousal was really refreshing, because I think we all could stand to know more about that and know more about how it functions and how it dysfunctions. So I'm excited for that.
Well, and that's like breaking down, like she broke down like desire, arousal disorders, orgasm disorders, and pain disorders. And I definitely think that's something we probably need to talk about more. So very good. The next one that so Holly Herman spoke, which she is the Herman of Herman and Wallace, if nobody's caught that. So she is kind of a legend. But one of her talks was on chain reactions from the pregnant foot, which I do. Obviously, we're hearing more and more and learning more and more about the interaction of the foot with the pelvic floor. But there were just a couple things she said. It was actually a pretty entertaining talk that she did. And this doesn't really have anything to do with the talk, other than she said, pelvic floor is the epicenter of the universe. The pelvic floor is the epicenter. And I just love that. I wrote it down and highlighted it, because I think those of us that work in the pelvic floor space would be like, yes, 100% we agree. It is the center of the universe for our bodies, because we feel like it's the foundation. And so I loved that so much. Yeah, another thing she made me laugh was like, if you're not a foot person, let's start. Like, we gotta be into feet. But she talks about like the placenta and the hormones from the placenta, and so the relaxin that's released, and kind of what happens with the foot, and how where the uterus shifts and how the body changes with pregnancy. And this, again, not anything new, but really good viewpoint. Things to consider, and how it affects the whole kinetic chain. So again, these little tidbits we'll probably be doing full episodes on. So she talks about the anterior fascial line, down the front of the body and the lateral fascial lines, posterior line. So, which that's, when we're working through the whole system, again, you have to work outside of the pelvic floor to be paying attention to how everything's moving together.
I really appreciated with hers too. It was pretty kind of just comical, but she had pictures of different celebrities.
Yes.
And I think it was funny, but I think it was such a good, real example of like, we just see people's feet and are like, oh, that's weird. But that's a big deal. Like when they're deviated, when there's, toes that are going different directions and there's, they're mashed or whatever as people get older. And the more that we are understanding and knowing how that impacts the pelvic floor, it was like, oh, this is funny, but also how normal is that just to look at like someone's feet and be like, oh, that's weird. That sucks or whatever. Or like, wow, I didn't expect their feet to look that way, or whatever. And like, really, it was the great denominator, feet shapes are the great denominator because these were celebrities that she had pictures of their feet on there and they had all sorts of stuff jacked up with them, And so anyway, we
all got good laughs.
We got good chuckles, yeah. But I think it was one of those of like, man, that's an indicator definitely of some dysfunction going on there. And whether they're having symptoms or not, we don't know, right? But like, just I think even as we learn more, it's like, man, even just observing our feet and are they shaped and are they growing in a way that's supposed to, or are they migrating into these wonky looking parts of us? And if they are, there's some pelvic floor ramification. And so that was just I think just a really simple but practical eye opener just to think, are my feet aging well?
Yeah.
As far as shape goes or orientation, or am I helping them stay healthy throughout the lifespan? Or, not that I'm wearing high heels every day, but it just is like,
it's pretty practical for sure. Yep. So Susan Clinton did another talk from bump to bow and navigating GI changes. And this was another one that I just loved. She talks about the physiological changes, the GI position changes, the GI motility changes. You get decreased transit time and local tissue changes. You also get change in the gut microbiome, the intestinal barrier changes, inflammation to the GI, anal canal can happen, and there's systemic effects. Again, it's stuff that, it's like, okay, we really do have to think about the fact that there is so much happening during pregnancy and then in that postpartum time that we get overlooked and we just want to blow past. And so it's really just great to kind of sit down and take stock into what our body does and the changes that happen. She said, again, this is nothing new. We didn't know, but she says, without sleep, there's no optimal GI system. And I think that is something we need to remember over and over again, because I see a lot of patients with chronic issues, autoimmunity, they're not sleeping, maybe they're having hormonal changes. It's like, we can't get past certain aspects of health because we're not sleeping, because gut is messed up and hormones are messed up and stress is, and so it's like when you feel like you're onto something at work and then you go to these conferences and you're like, yes, this is what I've been saying. It's just nice to have backup. I also, I have notes scribbled all over her lecture, different things that she talks about the hormonal influences, which obviously a lot of these we know, but good reminders again about the hormones that, bottom out afterwards, like estrogen and progesterone. And then we kind of have this adrenaline that kicks in because it's protective, but then it kind of like your body goes into overdrive. And so you have this cortisol kick up because you're taking care of this child and you're not sleeping and all these things. And so then, of course, that affects your hormones. So just kind of understanding those cascade of events so you can kind of work backwards and help people feel optimal and or get them to the right healthcare providers to make this better collaborative care team. Because not one provider, not one of us can do this alone. And I think that's the other thing that we're running into is we need to have multiple people on the team to help women recover. So she talks about one really cool thing is the vestibular system will adapt 48 to 72 hours right after delivery. So you're pregnant, your center of mass has changed, your balance has changed. And then right afterwards, it'll adapt back. And so she was talking about doing some different exercises to help recalibrate that vestibular system after pregnancy, that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally implementing these things. So that was cool. I think she talks about, I don't know if it was in this talk or what, but like 1 in 3 pregnant women fall. I think that might have been in the foot one. But just really thinking about some of these changes that take place and how we can help. They talked about, we know this, but getting rotation back in.
I think with some of the stuff that she talked about, sometimes I give an exercise with a specific purpose in mind of like, okay, maybe, so like just to speak into that rotation one of like, okay, I want to get rotation for, the pressure changes that come for like motility to get people's digestive system, going. Well, then she was talking about it like from a neural glide standpoint and really tractioning and like mobilizing the nerves. And it's not that I disagree. And it's not that isn't happening when I've given it. It's just this idea of like, there's so many layers that even sometimes as practitioners, we're going to give an exercise to you for a reason in our head. But then there's probably 3 or 4 or more other benefits that come from it that are happening and probably benefiting our patients. But we are giving it, we have kind of a, like, this is why, and it can also do this and this and this. But there's just so many layers, I guess, is what, like, really what that, a lot of what she was saying reminded me of like, yeah, I can have an intention for something, but there's going to be about a handful of other benefits that come from that same exercise that I either know is happening or I'm like kind of oblivious to in the moment.
Right. Yeah. She talks about the iliohypogastric, ilioinguinal, and genitofemoral nerves all get traction during pregnancy. And so to what you're saying, your point of then as we're adding back in this movement, we may not be telling people, well, hey, it's because these nerves, like we're trying to help these nerves. But it can be helpful sometimes because it gives people more purpose behind it of like, oh, okay, this is why we're doing this. But yeah, it was so great. She talks about just some really good, easy things to put into our interventions that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm adding this to our pregnancy postpartum program. But one of the things with like abdominal massage, like working on lifting and rotating the ribs and kind of that viscerosomatic crosstalk, it's relaxing to the system. And again, anything that's like is pulling in visceral and the somatic system and all of that to me is really fascinating right now, especially doing all the fertility work and visceral work and what people are reporting and saying. So I thought that was really great. I just loved this talk. I have so many little notes written down. Okay, let's see here. I have almost through it, people. Of course, we love Michelle Lyons. She talked about the menstrual cycle and having to become a menstrual detective. We will breeze right through that and probably do a whole episode soon here on the menstrual cycle. And yeah, I think with that, it just goes back to we just need to be doing better education so that we can be aware of what's normal and be aware of what's not normal and help educate our young girls better so that they aren't just growing up thinking that this is the way things need to be and that we're going to have all these painful periods. So we'll circle back to that one. But of course, she's one of our all-time favorites and could listen to her forever and ever. Okay. And then we, of course, had some great lectures by Taryn Hallam. We didn't dive into those on this little episode because her stuff is so incredibly rich and dense of information that takes some time. All I have to say is she's brilliant. So sometimes it is hard to follow her, but she is brilliant. And we'll circle back with her. The last one I was going to touch on was the manual therapy versus pain science education. I think just a good reminder that pain is a protective output of the brain, and pain is produced by the brain to protect you, not a direct measure of damage. And I think that again, I probably need to make a sign and put that in my office because, I mean, a perfect example of this was this weekend. My son had a baseball tournament and he had practice on Friday, and Saturday he got up and he had told me his back was sore. Well, they had been hitting and stuff the night before. And so his paraspinals, he was tight. And so I stretched him and stuff, but he is not used to hurting. Like, he's not used to having pain. And I just had to keep reading. I was like, you have some tight muscles. Like, pain does not mean that you have any sort of damage happening. Cause he's like my little, gets in his head kid, what's wrong? I have this pain, It's just really, it was, one of those things that just reminded me of that. Then I just reiterated, your body's okay. Your body's just telling you something. We can stretch and get some blood flow going. And what was fascinating was he didn't know this, but he was pitching, and it started to get kind of stressful and wasn't quite going his way. And, he did fine. He pulled it out. But when he was done, he was in the dugout and he wanted me to come over, and he was like, my back really hurts. Well, I noticed he started kind of moving and stretching as he got more stressed. And so, of course, to tell an 11-year-old, well, your pain probably got worse because you got stressed.
Do your pain science.
It doesn't compute my pain science theories.
On Owen.
All he is 11-year-old boy is like, Mom, my back hurts, So I, of course, was gracious, was like, oh, buddy, you did great. Mom will work on it later and we'll stretch. You're okay. And the next day he was fine. So, yeah. So I'm pain sciencing my kids, I'm like, it doesn't really hurt. No.
Yeah.
So anyway, but those were my top things. I mean, definitely there are others, and I can't wait to dive more into it. This just gives us such good information to talk about. We had 2 talks on pediatrics. That's a whole nother thing that we can talk about. And maybe we'll even be able to get a podcast guest on with pelvic floor pediatrics. So anything else, Rax, before we wrap it up?
No, I think rest assured that we're always learning, and we're trying to stay up with the latest and greatest. And this is an exciting field. And, I think too, when we're going to Pelvicon or just any kind of new information or new research, I think it's so exciting. And sometimes thinking okay, in 5 or 10 years, are we going to look back at this and know so much more and be like, oh yeah, I remember when we listened to that and half part of that's right. And actually now we know this about that. And so I just think it's an exciting time to be in this industry. And I think just an encouragement to listeners or patients or just the common normal folk of knowing that, and it doesn't just go for pelvic health either. I'm might get on a little tangent here, but just providers in general, we need to be lifelong learners. But we're also human. We can't know it all. And we also we're just as good as what we know, right? And so there might be something coming out new, and it might make liars of us today. Tomorrow's research might make us liars today. So anyway, just an encouragement to say, don't idolize your providers, but look for providers that are trying to stay up to date and trying to know the leading research and evidence in their fields. But then also give some grace too for, a provider can't stay up on every single thing. And anyway, I don't really know where that came from, but it just made me think of man, this is just a lifelong learning,
Right.
It's, we got to do the best we can with what we have and use our brain as best we know how and try to solve problems like we know.
That's good stuff. Okay. Well, until our next episode, we'll keep this conversation going, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.